when you look at what's really happening in our industry, in the learning industry and the talent development industry, AI is everywhere.
Especially being a father of teenagers right now, I watch kind of how not having some of those natural limitations and motivations to some degree, how that plays out in terms of their ability to have a vision, to be able to push through hard things or even want to try hard things, right?
If you don't stop and you don't reflect, you will become reactive. You will start creating noise in the market. You will burn your people out. You will get into all of the stereotypes of startup where you churn and burn, you raise a bunch of capital, but you lose it. You don't create real value. Human beings need to chill out to create real value and actually be creative and innovative.
All right, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You got Logan Jones and Evan Knowles coming to you on a Friday morning. Today we are talking with Darren Murriner and Kirsten Moore of Cloverleaf. So a company we've had on in the past. We're excited to highlight them again. They've got some updates in the realm of funding for Cloverleaf. So we're going to be talking about all of that, everything going on at the company as it relates to generative AI, and then diving into what's coming next for them. Before we dive into this episode, though, just want to give a quick call to action. By the time you hear this episode, Middle Tech will be having an event tomorrow, Tuesday, June 11th. We're highlighting Awesome Inc., celebrating their 15-year anniversary. So if you're looking for a cool event in Lexington, come join us here, a live podcast interview with Brian Rainey. So Evan and I will be hosting that. We're also pushing our newsletter hard. So if you want to keep up with everything Middle Tech and the events we're putting on, definitely subscribe to our newsletter. You can find that in the show notes. Now, before we dive in, let's get a quick word from our sponsors. Before highlighting our sponsors, we'd just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you're a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. Middle Tech is sponsored by Bolt Marketing. Take your website to the next level with a website that's built to work. At Bolt Marketing, they're revolutionizing websites for small businesses that are affordable, customizable, and hassle-free. Whether you have a construction company, a boutique clothing store, or you own a hot yoga studio, they have options for you. Click the link in our show notes to explore their marketing options that can transform your marketing and grow your business. And as a personal note, Bolt Marketing built our website, and they were awesome to work with throughout the entire process. We highly recommend working with them. Middle Tech is also supported by Huntsicker, an impact venture studio based in Lexington, Kentucky. Huntsicker is creating companies out of the ordinary by founding and funding the next generation of purpose-driven startups. They partner with founders to create indispensable solutions to the world's most fundamental problems. On a quarterly basis, they host an invite-only intimate gathering called Fireside Convos, where attendees representing a wide network of stakeholders in the regional entrepreneurial ecosystem discuss timely topics, including the role of AI for startups out of Kentucky and the challenges of identifying and attracting talent. To be considered as a guest, visit huntsicker.co/fireside to apply. All right, Darren, Kirsten, so good to be with you guys again. Thanks for taking some time out of your Friday morning to talk to us. How you guys doing this morning?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Jinx.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we're pumped to have you guys back on. Just to give the listeners an idea of how long it's been since we last spoke, we had you on for 179 back in January of 2022. So we have recorded 100 episodes since we had you on last. So we're excited to sit down and catch up on everything that's gone on over the past 2 years. I know the major story we're going to kind of be touching on is you raised a Series A at the end of March. So congrats on that.
By the way, 100 episodes since then is pretty remarkable. So good work, guys. That's a lot. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, we're excited to have some fresh capital. And long slog. I think this is the 5th time we've raised money. So every time, I don't know, in some ways gets easier, and in other ways can get more difficult. So yeah,
I'm sure
excited to have that behind us.
I'm sure we'll dive into all of that here in just a bit as well. But yeah, let's start by just refreshing the audience on Cloverleaf. So automated coaching technology for workers and teams, just to kind of set the stage there. But let's go all the way back and kind of retell the founding story real quick. So just talk about how the company was started and, how you all identified the problem and why you set out to solve it in the way that you guys have.
Sure, yeah. So Darren and I met working at a local agency here in Cincinnati, and it was a creative agency. So we had the same group of people constantly reorganized onto different projects. So, you would see this animator with this creative director was stellar. I mean, you would just it would be a stick figure video about how we're moving to the cloud, and everyone would cry because it was just amazing, right? And the client loved it, wanted more videos, you'd get more money. It was a win all around. You'd take that same animator, put him with a different creative director, and it would just be friction at every touch point, and things would be late and feedback wouldn't be incorporated, and the client was frustrated, and then the final product was just low quality and people wanted money back, and it just didn't go well at all. But those people had all the capabilities. It really came down to how they were working together. And I just saw that play out over and over and over as I led a lot of those teams. And so I had my people take Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder because I thought, the answer is in here. Those are two assessments that really helped me know myself better, how I show up, what strengths I have to play into, all of that kind of stuff. And I just I had everyone take it, and I could not figure out what to do with it because I didn't understand deeply the difference between an S and a T and a J and an I and an E and all of those letters, and restorative versus achiever and all of those things. So long story short, Darren approached me shortly after I left that company because I had my first kid, and he said, "Hey, let's start a business about this together. Their technology could totally help disrupt these assessments. They've just been done the same way for decades and decades, and there's so much good information in there, but people don't know how to get to the good information. So tech could come and help disrupt this and really bring value to people in a new way."
I'm curious at that time, how big was the market around coaching around this subset of data? The Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs, all those personality tests. Was there a market there, or have you guys kind of been bringing that market to the software space, or was there kind of one-on-one consultants? What did it look like when you guys first entered?
Yeah,
there's a huge market. Yeah, go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So, I think the traditional coaching model, they used assessments pretty extensively, right? But I don't think there wasn't really a technology component to it. So the traditional model is, you want to bring your team together and you want to do some sort of team building. You hire a coach. The coach usually is aligned with some sort of an assessment, right? They're certified in DISC or StrengthsFinders, and so you bring that person in, you pay them $10,000. They, they put your whole team through usually one assessment, right? Not multiple assessments. And then at the end of that, you get this 40-page PDF report that's kind of all about you. And you do a debrief, and, 40 to 50% of that $10,000 that you paid is just to get the assessment for everybody, right? And so it ends up not being very efficient because oftentimes you end up retaking that assessment multiple times at different employers. You get this 40-page PDF. It's all about you, but it doesn't really speak to your interactions and the people around you. Oftentimes even it's kind of hey, we don't share your report, or we're not going to share that broadly. And so it really just diminishes the overall value of that market. And so I think that was part of some of the challenges that we were seeing, right? It wasn't just, as Kirsten mentioned, hey, how do I interpret these results? How do I navigate through this? And more importantly, how do I use that in my day-to-day work when this facilitator or this coach isn't around? And it just was clear to us. And by the way, that market, the assessment market's about $4 billion annually. And the coaching market's about $13 billion annually. And so, but that is, the traditional markets. And I think there has been an explosion in, I would say, innovative startups, most of the stuff in the coaching space has been focused on connecting a human coach to people inside the organization that needs a human coach. So that's we don't necessarily believe that's a ton of innovation, and it truly doesn't provide coaching to everyone in the organization. Maybe it extends or expands access to coaching, but the only real way that you can scale coaching to the entire enterprise is by really leaning into technology. And I think even more so with kind of a lot of the new generative AI capabilities that are on the market. And that's, generative AI wasn't, a huge buzzword in 2016 when
22.
we were noodling on this, right?
Or 22, the last time we talked, it wasn't even big yet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think an explosion in workplace data, taking these assessments into a more digital model and access to these generative tools, I think really just put us in a really great position to take it to a whole new level. And that's really what we're excited about right now.
Yeah. I remember when ChatGPT kind of first became mainstream, one of the first things that I started trying to do with it is I took my Enneagram and StrengthsFinder and those different things and put it into ChatGPT. And I think I ended up calling mine like Life Coach, something like Life Coach GPT. And it is pretty crazy, like some of the stuff it can tell you if you give it all of that data. So integrating that into a product like your all's, I think is just a no-brainer with generative AI. So kind of help paint us a picture of how a team actually interacts with your product. So if you have a story or a scenario of like how a team would benefit from using Cloverleaf, I think that would help kind of paint the picture for the audience.
Yeah.
Kirsten, you or me, Darren?
Yeah. Why don't you take this one?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a number of different ways that people are using it. I mean, just one easy one would be, hey, you're about to have a meeting and there's, 5 people in the meeting. You can, Cloverleaf will read your calendar, will send you a tip about everyone that you're going to meet with and tell you, hey, try to persuade Darren this way. If Evan starts acting this way, it might mean this, and you could read all of that. It's helpful tips, but you could also say, you know what, this is not what I need. Like what I need is, I don't feel like Darren's listening to me. So I'll click through into the app and I'll say like, hey, why isn't Darren listening to me? I can just literally type that in and it can tell me, hey, here's some things about Darren and how he communicates, and it'll help me understand, oh, okay, if I just reframe it this way, this might work better for me. And then, I could go back to that actual like meeting that I'm about to have, and I can click through that in the app and it can spin up a dashboard for me and show me, hey, here's the makeup of this team. Here's like how, it's mostly extroverts. You're the only introvert. Think about this, or, it'll just walk you through what is important for you to know about relating to these people, getting your best into that meeting, and then also, being the most effective as a group together.
Yeah, I was a customer. So I was a customer of yours. We went to a HR consultant as part of the Vote Awards, which is a program here in Kentucky. And we took the test. My whole team did. We had a kind of a sit down and just went over it together. But one thing that I noticed that you all did well was, I think all of us are like inundated with email all the time. But what was interesting about your all's product was each week, I would get an email kind of breaking down a way to think about how to interact with my team. I would get an email about one of my teammates and how to engage them, what problems they might be facing because of their personality, ways that they're leaning into their personality. And my open rate on those were good because like I felt that was valuable and it was unique data that, I really didn't have access to otherwise. So I think the way that you guys have built like that very passive, always on coach is really fascinating. And I'm curious, like, where do you see that going and how have you found it's best to interact with your customers? Is it email? I'm sure you guys have like Slack and Teams integrations and you're probably heading in that direction of like an assistant that's, everywhere you are. So how do you think about where that goes? Because email was valuable enough for me at that time. So I think there's so much more potential to make it valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably have evolved quite a bit since then as well, because, I mean, you even just mentioned, like, I think once a week. And Since then, we've given the user a lot more control over how often they're getting that coaching, who they're getting coaching on. To your point, right? Not just in your inbox. Like, I think with our team, there's kind of this like clear divide in terms of like where people communicate with each other, because like our internal product and engineering teams typically just live in Slack. We're a Slack shop, not an MS Teams. But we also have an MS Teams app as well, right? So being able to pick and choose, like, hey, which tool and which channels you're getting that coaching in, and how frequently and who you're getting it on, is really important, right? That was something that we heard very early on where, and you're right, the open rate is crazy, like, I mean, I think the typical open rates on email today is like less than 20%. And our open rates are like 70+%, right? And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, because it's extremely relevant to you, right? Who you're meeting with that day, who's on your team, who's in your coaching network, right? All of that stuff is critical, I think, to being able to provide real value to the end user. And I think that's the other really important piece for us, is we've really focused, we're an enterprise technology, but we've really focused on the individual employee. And I think a lot of enterprise software tends to focus more on the buyer, whoever that is, right? If it's marketing technology, it focuses on the CMO and, giving them dashboards and reporting. And because of that, what ends up happening is you end up making something that serves their purposes, but actually doesn't give them the data they need, because it's not relevant to the people at lower levels in the organization that need access to it. And so we've really just focused on building for the individual employee, right? The new person at an individual contributor level that just entered the organization. How do we give them value? And if we give them value, then we know it's going to aggregate up to that chief learning officer or VP of learning and development, right? Because you can aggregate data and you can layer value at those higher levels. But at the end of the day, if it's not valuable to the individual employee, then it's definitely not going to be valuable to the enterprise.
I'm curious, right there, you said, we're an enterprise software company. Did you start at enterprise? This is always a question founders, I think struggle with, is like, where in the market do I focus? And obviously enterprise, longer sales cycles, harder to get in, larger contract sizes, but smaller, medium-sized businesses, easier to get in, smaller contract sizes, higher churn. So did you graduate to enterprise, or did you guys just decide as a business at some point early on that, hey, like this enterprise market has to be where we focus?
I think it's a couple things. I mean, one, Cloverleaf is very applicable to any team, right? So that made it kind of hard to focus in the early days, because we're like, wow, look at this entire world of possibility. Like, everyone could use this product. And even today, and part of what we did to really support that is built a product-led experience. So like, you can go to our website and start a free trial, and a lot of people do that. But what we started to do is focus where we spend our resources, right? We don't need to jump on a demo with somebody that has a 20-person team or an 8-person team. So what we quickly realized, I would say like within a year or so of starting the company, is that really where we have the biggest opportunity to move the needle for organizations is where there's 1,000 or more employees. And part of the reason why is because there's a lot of cross-functional teaming, right? If you are on the same team, you've been on that team for 5 years or 10 years, and you guys have a long history together, just the two of you, right? As a great example, like, you've been doing this for a while, you've known each other for a while, like, Cloverleaf's going to give you some value, but like, it's not nearly as much value as if you work in, GE, and you have to sell your idea to some VP of finance that lives halfway around the world, right? And you've never met that person before, and you don't know what kind of motivates them, or what are the things that really convince them, make a compelling business case. That's stuff that is invaluable, right? Or, for in large organizations like that, sometimes it's pretty easy to get lost and feel disconnected, or like you don't have a place on the team that you're a part of, or that maybe you just joined. And so those are the situations where we really add the most value, right? Because we can accelerate onboarding, we can give you that insight, that really unique insight about what's going to sell that VP of finance before you even walk in the room. So it gives you an opportunity to shape your argument, to come with the support that you need that's really going to win the case, right, for that person. And that's been key for us.
And I'll also add to that for this startup community that we are speaking to right now. We knew that from the beginning, but InfoSec, GDPR, like all the like infrastructure needed, and Evan, to your point of just like super long sales cycles, and we had runway. It was really like most of our first customers were not in our what we knew would probably eventually become our ICP, which today is our ICP. Like it was like we just got to close deals, we got to get into there faster, and so not too surprisingly, we also had higher churn because we knew it wasn't the best use case, but it was still just like it was enough for us to get in, to learn, to refine the product, to grow it, so that we could get enough traction, to raise enough capital, to have enough engineers, to do all of the things you have to do to be able to get into the enterprise and get into the enterprise well. And also another challenge that we've always had is the fact that like nobody else has ever done what we are doing. And still to this day, nobody is really doing what we're doing. And you would like when people in your pitch decks, you always have to have your like, oh, here's our competitors. And like, everyone's like, you can't say you have no competitors. Nobody will believe you. Like, you have to say you have competitors. And so we would like make up things, but like, it's actually like, it's good. And it's really hard to not have competitors, because then people are like, oh, okay, so you're just like better up. No, we're not. We don't connect you to human coaches. Oh, okay. So you're like a chat bot coach. Like, no, we're not. We're actually like, and you just have to like constantly re-explain it. And that is really hard to sell into the enterprise, where trust is key, reliability is key. And so no, high level enterprise leader wants to be the one to put their neck on the line and say, let's try something I've never heard of before and that has no proven track record. Yeah. So like definitely our early adopters were not in the enterprise because we just had so much we had to build up to get there.
Yeah, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Using those early customers like that to kind of identify product market fit. And I think that kind of leads nicely into talking about your all's fundraising. So I think right after we had talked to you in 2022, you guys had raised around, I believe that was 9 million. And then at the end of March here, you just announced a $7.3 million raise. So just, talking about product market fit, just talk about how the company has evolved as you guys have continued to build. I know we talked about going from, some of those early customers to more of an enterprise, but I guess more so from your all's perspective, not necessarily outwardly facing, but how you view the company as the founders. Just kind of talk about how things have changed for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just that our company changes or the market changes, but also the funding environment changes, right? I mean, I think the funding environment this time was one of the most unique. We've raised 5 times, and this was one where, kind of the things that investors had looked for in the past weren't the things that they were looking for this time, right? And so I think it's not just about what are your proof points at each stage in developing your business, because I think the very first raise is just like, hey, it's vision. And it's like, how much do other people buy into that vision? And then it was like for our second raise, it was kind of like, hey, we were able to prove that people were interested in this product, right? Like we were able to go get folks and engage them in a really scalable way, in a really cost-effective way in those early days as well. And then, it's like each stage is a little bit different in terms of kind of like what you're proving out and what the investors are looking for. But I think this one was so unique because honestly, like it's just a really hard market to raise in. And I think one of the really interesting things is I think the focus on capital efficiency. And I mean, building and growing and scaling a startup in the Midwest or in the South, right, is you kind of are forced to be capital efficient, right? Like our first raises, you just mentioned a couple of larger raises, but the first 3 raises that we had, I think in total were like roughly $5 million, right? So this is not, it wasn't like we were getting, Silicon Valley level seed and, Series A kind of rounds. And so I think that did force some level of capital efficiency. But I think one of the things that really resonated with investors in this round for us is that we have a channel strategy that allows us to be more efficient with our go-to-market motion. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated in this environment, right? So I think that's the other interesting thing about fundraising is that it's not just, what proof points have you been able to validate between the last raise and where you're trying to go on this raise, but it's also just like, hey, what are investors looking for? And is that, how does that align with kind of your business objectives and your overall strategy? So that was, I think, a pretty unique element of this particular fundraise.
Yeah.
What have you found? You mentioned, being in the Midwest is capital efficiency is super important by default. I mean, that's just how we have to operate. Did you go to the coast for money, and maybe like how did you break up? Because one thing that I'm always curious about, and we just haven't seen enough companies recently, do this, but how far can you actually get with Midwest capital before you have to start tapping in to the coast to scale? Like there is some ceiling there, right? So have you guys hit that, or where are you at with that?
Yeah, I do think, by the way, I do think there are more later stage funds in the Midwest, right? Drive Capital in Columbus was a great example of that at kind of like that A-B level. But I think we're seeing more and more funds, even, and even at like Growth Equity, which is kind of, VC adjacent, there's more of that than there's ever been. And I think Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky is a great example of that. Like when we first started, funds like Kinetic, we're kind of coming onto the scene. Now there's eGateway, which is a later stage, right? I mean, that's like a little bit more kind of growth equity kind of model. So like we've seen more availability of capital in the Midwest, but I would say we've continued to kind of grow our networks out from the Midwest and the South. We were pretty much exclusively Midwest, Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky region investors in that first round. And then it was kind of like, hey, when we got to our A, it was Chicago investors. And, Origin led our series, or the initial Series A. And, they have a strong Chicago and a strong Salt Lake City influence, right? So we were kind of starting to build out. And then this raise, it was really 2 coastal investors. So one out of the Bay Area, Conductive VC, which is, we're really excited about them as a partner. And then the other is Advantage Capital, and they're more like Northeast based. And so, we're on the 5th raise and, finally kind of got to coastal investors. Mucker Capital out of LA, I think they've been very active in the Midwest as well. And they've been in with us for 3 rounds at this point. So we got there, but like we didn't start there. And I think that's the big thing is like, you're probably not just going to go straight to a coastal investor, with your first raise, unless you have strong connections or there's somebody that, is on your board or something that has strong connections. But I think it's more about just being patient and continuing to build your network. And, you'll eventually get there.
That's cool that Mucker is involved with you guys as well. They invest in the startup that I was with last year. So they're getting a lot of action out of this area.
Great fund. Yeah, great fund.
They are.
They've had
great people.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk about post this fundraise. Like, where does growth come from here? So I was reading an article about this fundraise, and it sounds like you guys are kind of positioning yourselves to start expanding into some other areas of professional development. But talk about where your head's at with that. Like, where is kind of the next phase of growth coming from for Cloverleaf?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're doing is adding to our go-to-market leadership team. So, I mean, I think we've grown nicely, but without a lot of experience. I think experienced leadership on the go-to-market side. So we're in the process and, have selected a sales leader and a marketing leader. So we're really excited about that. And we'll be issuing a press release on that soon. So I think part of it is just bringing more experience in on that side. I think I alluded to earlier that we have a channel strategy, right? We serve coaches, human capital consultants, people who are doing leadership development and new manager training programs, like those folks. We've built a product that I think aligns nicely with their goals. It helps them sustain the work that they're doing with their clients. It helps them create some business development opportunities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So there's really a nice alignment with that channel. So we're going to continue to lean in on that. I think even more in the coming years. And I think ultimately the nice thing about our product is it's pretty viral. And even when people leave an organization, they go to another company, they're like, man, this was an indispensable part of how I did my work. And
That's special.
so we're working with large multinationals. They are, like those folks also move to other companies as well. So that creates additional expansion opportunities into other organizations and, adjacent companies in the same industry. So I think it's really a heavy focus kind of on our go-to-market, both in terms of like leadership and focusing on channel and how can we leverage kind of that natural virality that happens when people leave an organization or maybe they have folks in their network and they're referring us off. Like how do we help accelerate that referral momentum?
Yeah, I'm curious. Speaking about sales real quick, kind of two-part question here. How long did you do founder-led sales, and are you still doing that? And then you mentioned earlier that you are using channels for distribution. Talk about maybe like best practices and your learnings about how to incentivize these channels and how to cooperate with them and really leverage them. So you can take either one of those first, but yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kirsten and I will probably always be involved in sales and business development in some way,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, are we active in Salesforce? No, but I think we play an important role in terms of, leveraging our board and investors and partners to get in front of the right people. And sometimes that's on the front end of the sales process where it's like, hey, we have a unique connection and let's start there and then hand them off to our team internally to navigate an actual sales process. Sometimes it might be on the back end, right? Like, hey, it's a really important sale and we're going to be involved in kind of making that final pitch, that final push. So I think part of it is as Kirsten and I's role evolves in the organization, it's like, how do we play the right role at the right time in the business development process? But I don't think we'll ever, not be involved in some way in business development. I think it's just, and I think especially with the enterprise, like enterprise buyers really value the having the founder, having the senior leaders demonstrate, right, their commitment to the organization, their commitment to our commitment to things like information security and data privacy and validity and reliability around our product. Like those things are really important. They tend to be more risk averse buyers, right? And the risks are higher in those organizations. So I think those are the roles that Kirsten and I have kind of leaned into in the business development process. And then I think on the channel side, the biggest thing about channel is how do you align incentives, right? It can't just be about you, right? It can't just be about Cloverleaf and them helping us sell. But we have to provide real value to our channel partners. And that's part of the reason why we've built product features and capabilities that support our coach and consultant community. If it's more traditional partnership from the standpoint of like, hey, we're a partner in Workday's ecosystem. It's still no different there, right? I mean, they're looking for solutions they can bring to their clients to keep other companies like SAP and Oracle from coming in and stealing their customers, right? Or they want to extend the value of their platform. So it still is about what you can do for your partner, right? Not just what they can do for you. And I think that's a tricky balance because, you're constantly evaluating, hey, am I, and our partners are evaluating this, right? Is how much am I giving and how much am I receiving in this relationship? So,
Well, last question here, kind of on the product and kind of go to market. How do you think about AI? So imagine that in some part of your pitch deck, you probably had a slide on there like, hey, generative AI is here. We're very unstructured data heavy. Like we've got all kinds of opportunity here with text and natural language. We're a coaching platform. How do you think about how you weave, the new AI revolution into your all's existing suite? I think that one of the cool things I've seen in the startup space is there are those companies that are leveraging AI to build net new solutions that just couldn't exist prior. And then there's those companies that were like great timing. They built out an existing platform. Gen AI just makes them that much better. And then there's the older companies that might be incumbents that might be in trouble because they were there early. Their architecture is probably not really structured well for AI. I would imagine you fall in that second one, which is you guys are in a great position because of just the nature of your product. So how do you all think about where Gen AI takes you?
Yeah, I can easily speak to this one. So I think about it a couple of different ways. One, on the spectrum of AI, we've been doing AI for a long time. And two, when you look at what's really happening in our industry, in the learning industry and the talent development industry, AI is everywhere. Like we were just at our biggest conference, Association for Training and Development, and it was like there were hundreds and hundreds of sessions. Probably 25% of them at least were about AI. Of the 350 vendors, a ton of them had AI everywhere. And all of the people coming by our booth were like, oh, thank God, you're not an AI chatbot. Like they're just like sick of it. You know what I mean? So I do think that there is like a huge buzz that people are actually skeptical to. So we have not actually, from a marketing standpoint, really leaned into that because people are skeptical, but also because like in the enterprise, data privacy, EEOC laws, like all of that kind of stuff. I think like the pendulum can swing too far, right? It's not as attractive as some people think it is. I think another thing about it is when you look at what's really coming out in AI in our industry, it's a lot of like, just create more content, like have more out there, right? Which already people and users feel inundated by what was there before Gen AI could make it 10 times more. You know what I mean? So we're looking at it quite differently than a lot of others are in our space, which is just less about how do we have more, but more, how do we get more accurate to you? How do we understand, you're walking into this meeting with Darren and you don't feel heard, or you're walking into this meeting with Logan and, you need to convince him of this thing. How do we better understand, like, Logan's your boss, Logan's not your boss. Like, you've been working together for a long time. You haven't, like, he's across the world, or, what are all the data points that matter to you now having to accomplish the next thing in your workday? And so that's really where AI has helped us grow more. I would say it's like, it's less about noise and it's more about targeting. So that you're getting the right thing that you need at the right time so that we can truly impact your life for the better. But also overall, like you aggregate that up, that just means the whole organization is more innovative, more psychologically safe, more connected, more, efficient, all of the things that matter for your market productivity. So yeah, I think when it comes to AI, I actually feel like, we're being pretty different and we aren't actually talking too much about that loudly out in the market because it seems like our customers actually aren't that interested in it being used that much.
I think the other thing I would say too is, we're a learning technology, right? We're a development technology. And, I think a lot of what AI is being leveraged for is to shortcut things, right? I mean, like shortcut the content creation process, shortcut the, finding resources and accessibility of the right information. And, for people who are career their whole career is focused on learning, right? Part of learning is about the process, right? So if you leverage AI to shortcut the learning process, then actually it's almost an antithesis to what
Correct.
learning and development leaders are about. And so part of it is like, how do we leverage AI to personalize that experience? So we're not shortcutting the learning process, but we're accelerating the learning process. And I think that's a really unique element about our industry. Like that's not necessarily the case in marketing, or it's not necessarily the case in finance, right? Like those are industries where it's like, yeah, absolutely leverage AI to shortcut, generating the first 50 to 60% of the content, and then you kind of come in and put your personal touches on it. But like that kind of doesn't work with learning and development, right? Because it's as much about the process as it is the outcome. So
Totally.
Yeah, that's great. And that's just a very kind of self-aware as a company way to look at it. I would view that as unique for sure, but it's definitely easy to kind of get lost in all of the, everything going on in Gen AI and all the excitement around it and all the possibilities around it, but truly understanding how your customers feel about it and the underlying processes of like, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And is generative AI implemented in this way better than implementing it in that way? I think that's just a very, that's really knowing your business and knowing your customers, which I think is super important as we kind of navigate the transition here, because it's easy to get caught up in the frenzy of it and the excitement of it.
And I think that's why a lot of our customers are kind of just like, thank God you're not doing that, because a lot of people are starting to do the obvious thing. So there's a lot of rinse and repeat, like noise. It's all the same thing. And it's more like the value is not yet there. And so people are just kind of, they feel jaded about it.
100%. I think that's a great takeaway you guys have from your experience building in the space. Transitioning over to kind of your all's experience building this company and, some of the learnings from it. Would love to get into any founder wisdom that you guys have picked up over this time. Kirsten, I know that when we spoke, you just talked about kind of like load management and stress management as an entrepreneur. I feel like you've been very transparent about all of that on social media and all that sort of thing, all that sort of stuff. But just any founder wisdom that you think is, whenever you're talking with an entrepreneur, that you feel is valuable and can either help prepare somebody for the journey or help them navigate it once they're in it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that one thing is Darren and our relationship is key. So, we had a really busy few months with the fundraise, and I just reached out to him. I was like, can we go out for drinks? Like, I feel like we have not just talked in a long time. Once a year-ish, it really is more like every 2 years. Like, we try to go away with our spouses, just the four of us, and like, just have some space. We try to create time, we connect every week in a one-on-one, but it gets pretty tactical. So sometimes we'll just be like, all right, let's just go do something, just like connect, I think that's really key, so that when we do get into those moments of tension or whatever, we actually have a space to, like, we have that relationship to really understand each other and challenge each other and bring different perspectives. I think that's key to stress management, because some of the most stressful things can be when I feel disaligned with Darren. So I think that's really important. I think also, like, we have an unlimited vacation policy, and I know a lot of people do, and it's kind of like, that means nobody ever takes vacation, but we actually really require our people to take at least 1 week off. And a lot of folks take more than, like, at least one consecutive week. And then we have, office closed throughout the year, all that kind of stuff. And we don't have a culture where people are slacking at 8 p.m. You hear a lot of other tech companies. We heard one recently say, like, oh, the way culture is thriving is when people are slacking until midnight. I was like, I don't agree with that at all. Because they were like, that's when the real work happens, is after, the kids are in bed. I was like, oh, you mean when they're not sleeping and they're not like having a healthy personal life? That's how culture is good. And I disagree with that, because we are, if you've picked it up from our answers so far, like, we're trying to be really thoughtful and actually provide real value to human beings, not just what markets are asking for. And that takes a high level of creativity. And stress just closes your mind to creativity. And also, hyperactivity, working often, working all the time closes your mind to that creativity. You need that white space. You need that downtime. And so I think generally we have pretty healthy work-life balance across our company. And for the past, 5 months, I have not. And especially the past 6 weeks, I really have not. And I talked to my husband about it going into May. I said, May is going to be cray, and I'm going to be working all the time, and I'm going to be traveling a lot, and I'm going to be stressed, and let's just be intentional about this. And that all ended yesterday. And I knew yesterday was the day it ends. And so today and Monday, I've got the days blocked off to recalibrate, think, refocus. And I think that, there are seasons where you just have to run, and that is good. And then you also really need to be intentional about if you don't stop and you don't reflect, you will become reactive. You will start creating noise in the market. You will burn your people out. You will get into all of the stereotypes of startup where you churn and burn, you raise a bunch of capital, but you lose it. You don't create real value. Human beings need to chill out to create real value and actually be creative and innovative.
I love that. I'm all about chilling out. I'm a pretty chill guy. So mixing startups
I am not.
It's always a dance.
Darren and I were meeting on Monday, and he was like, Kirsten, I'm worried about you. You're very manic right now. And I was like, yes, I am, but we got stuff to do.
It's always a balance. It's like walking that fine line and being able to kind of switch between the two every now and then. Curious on more of a personal level. And this is kind of a question geared towards really trying to be intentional about having an audience of college students, people that, want to get into business, want to get into entrepreneurship. I'm curious if either of you guys have any common threads that you can point to as, how you ended up as a founder. When you think about personality traits or decision-making frameworks or mental models, things like that, anything like that kind of you feel led you to where you are today.
I mean, I think personally, a lot of it comes back to motivation, right? And some things like grit, right? Which I know is maybe a little bit overused. I know personally, I came from a financially poor, right, family and environment, and I know that that, especially being a father of teenagers right now, I watch kind of how not having some of those natural limitations and motivations to some degree, how that plays out in terms of their ability to have a vision, to be able to push through hard things or even want to try hard things, right? I've always, and I've talked to Kirsten about this a lot because I've never seen a study on this, but when I think about founders, successful founders, and kind of maybe what common threads might exist, hey, if I were running my own fund at some point, and what would I look for in founders is drilling into that a little bit more. I've raised 5 times, and not once have I had an investor really dig into who I am, right? Or who Kirsten is, right? And it feels like a major miss because it's hey, you could have all the passion in the world about something, right? But there is this element because, man, startup work is really freaking hard, right? It is the highest of highs and lowest of lows. Mostly the lowest of lows, right?
Yes.
If you were to look at the number of days, that have highs and lows on, if you average it out on a daily basis, I'm guessing it's 9 to 1, 9.5 to a half, in terms of things that are really hard and where you're just kind of man, what are we doing? And none of this is working and all of those kinds of things. And I don't know how you get through that. I have that kind of personally grit and determination, all the things from my background, but then also having a partner like Kirsten where we're super aligned and hey, when you're having a personally low day, you can lean into each other. Solo founders where you don't have that kind of background, I honestly don't know how they make it,
Yeah.
It is such a grind. And So I think those are things that I would tend to look for is like, hey, if you're on your own and you're feeling like you can do this, like don't go find an amazing co-founder that's passionate about what you're building and is going to be committed to the cause, because like you're going to need that person to lean on. And so I don't know, those are a handful of things that I think of.
One other thing I would add to that is like, Darren does have the childhood stories of like selling things in class and like earning money and like just, typical entrepreneur childhood. I was the opposite. I was like, I never want to sell anything. I never want to be rejected. I want everyone to like me. I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to follow all the rules. And so I always like to share that when it's like, hey, could talking to people who might be thinking about being an entrepreneur, if you don't have that typical story, that's fine. That's totally fine. And then I think also, there is like just generally a growing cultural acceptance of comfort is good and discomfort is bad. Right. And I think kind of what Darren is getting at is like, things that make you anxious, like that doesn't mean you need to avoid them. Actually, sometimes you need to run headlong into them. Like I don't like rejection. I have been told no more times in my life in the past, few years of growing Cloverleaf than ever before. And like, while I hated that and it made me like sweat a ton and feel horrible about myself for the first year, like now it's okay. It's normalized. Right. So I think, just college students, young folks thinking about, would I do this? Like when those failures come, because they're going to come like the first week you try to start a business, like as the failures come at you, like, just accept that, like, it's okay to feel your feels and hate it and cry and whatever. That's fine. But like, don't let that stop you. Every single no, every single failure, every single mistake is an opportunity for growth and for learning something. And so embracing that rather than viewing that as like, well, clearly the door has closed on me. The universe is telling me to quit. Like, no, you gotta just push it through.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I really love that. I talk a lot about leaning into discomfort, and kind of the saying that I tell to myself a lot is I'm most comfortable when I'm slightly uncomfortable. Like if I'm not pushing the envelope a little bit, I start getting anxious of like, I'm not moving forward. I'm not growing as an individual. So I love that. And that's something I talk about a lot as well. As we wrap up here, kind of last question, you guys are certainly one of the more successful companies in this region. You've been involved in a lot of the, you've been involved with Awesome Inc. and some of the other resources, and it's been fun to kind of get to know you guys over the years. Talk about what's been the best part of building a company in this region. What have you enjoyed the most about?
Yeah, personally, I think a lot of it is about the people.
That's what I was going to say.
People not only like from a support standpoint really care and are passionate about growing successful businesses, celebrating wins, all of that kind of stuff. But it's also like the people that we've hired. Our workforce is about 50-50, right? So like 50% from the region and 50% from all over the US. And man, it's been incredible. Like there might be some skill sets that are hard to find here, but I would say for the majority of things that you need to run a business, you can find that here. And they're extremely loyal. They care and are committed in a way that maybe isn't there in other regions of the country. There's just like a cultural component that is about leaning in and supporting and being committed to I would say not just the success, right? But also about, the journey and what it means in terms of taking those lessons and building into kind of the next generation of startups. And, how are we increasing and growing the talent and the experience that exists here so that we can build into that next generation. So I feel like it comes back to the people.
I completely agree. And one other thing I would add to that is like, oh, sorry, go Logan.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Jinx. Okay. One other thing I would say to that is like, it's also other founders. Other founders are super loyal and generous to us, right? Like what we hear about Silicon Valley and, more coastal big city regions. And like, even when we've interviewed people in those places, like there is not this like all boats rise mentality. you know, whereas like around here, there really is that mentality from like all facets of the ecosystem. And people are just generally really generous and want to help out, whether they're in your company or they're in another company, or they're, you know, an investor that didn't even invest in us, or not even our lawyer anymore, you know, whatever it is, there is like this, hey, we all want to see the whole ecosystem rise, and we care about the humans who are involved in the process.
Yeah, I love specifically kind of calling out the part of your employees and the people that are actually coming alongside you on the journey to help build it, and building those people up, because that's such an important part of the ecosystem as well, as like really helping upskill the talent that's here in this region. And it is, I think that plays a big part in having the resilience and the grit that's needed to last long term with a startup and get it past the startup phase, is having those people that are loyal and are dedicated, and you know, are just genuinely really good people, is kind of the way that you can summarize I guess this Midwest type of culture that we have here. But yeah, past that, you know, it's been awesome catching up with you guys. Tell us where, if somebody is listening and they want to try out Cloverleaf, they want to recommend it to their boss, where can they go to learn more about it? Where can they go to, you know, learn more about you two?
So, I mean, it's really important that people note that our website address is cloverleaf.me. So go there. There is an opportunity to start a free trial, right? If you're on a team, you lead a team that wants to be higher performing, if you are a coach or consultant or involved in leadership development, training, any of those kinds of things, like go just start a trial and experience it for yourself. And it's not just about you, right? One of the key things in that onboarding process is about invite others into that experience, right? So if you are on that team, invite your team members into it, invite those around you that you care about building a better relationship with. And so, yeah, that's it. I mean, just do that. And if it gives you value and you're like excited about, you know, using that in a bigger way, then we can go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to come on. Keep kicking ass. You guys are crushing it. We love watching you.
Thanks,
so
guys.
I'm sure we'll talk again soon, but until next time, it's been great.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Logan. Thanks, Evan.
See y'all.